Quick question for you. How many of you, when your children were young, had to teach your children how to disobey? Probably none of you. You tell them, don't do this, and it's almost an invitation or a dare, a challenge to do that when you're not looking. Tell them not to run out in the street. What do? They run out in the street. Tell your teenager, be home at 11, and they'll come home at 11:30, even if it means sitting in the front drive for 30 minutes, just to tell you who's boss. I think we love rules almost so much so that we can disobey them. Tell a man to drive 70 miles an hour, and how fast is he going to go? 75, right? I heard certainly there's a thrill in driving fast, but I think deep down there's a thrill in breaking the rules as well. And these rules that Carolyn read to us is called the Decalogue, or the 10 Commandments, and they are the ultimate rule. And as I said a minute ago, all of Western law is based on these 10 Commandments. Now, we in the church get a bad rap because people say, oh, it's thou shalt nots and thou shalls, and it's just really bossy and particular and finicky, and it frankly just cramps my style. We like to disobey the 10 Commandments rather than obey them. And that's because I think that we understand them in the wrong light. We have to think back, where did they come from and why were they given? And most particularly, who were they given to? Now you remember, they came during the period of the Exodus. For 400 years, the Israelites had been enslaved in Egypt, and Moses came along at God's direction and said to the Pharaoh, let my people go. And Pharaoh said, heck no, I'm not letting your people go. And Moses said, well, God's going to bring trouble for you. And over a series of weeks and months, God brought a series of plagues. You remember them? The Nile turned to blood, there was frogs, there was gnats, there was thunder, there was lightning, there was hail, there was darkness, and finally there was the Passover. And on that night, every firstborn child, every firstborn son in every Egyptian family, every firstborn of their cattle or livestock, they died on the same night. And finally this broke the spirit of the Pharaoh, and he says, I've had enough, on you go. Sometime later, God spoke to Moses and said, consecrate the people. In other words, get them to clean up, wash their clothes, abstain from sexual relations for a period of time so that they become a holy people. And God spoke to Moses and gave him the 10 Commandments, the 2 tablets of the law. And Moses came down from the mountain and informed the people that these 10 Commandments had been given by God. So they had a unique authority. Moses didn't write them down. Moses wasn't a lawyer. He wasn't even inspired to write them down, as many of the biblical writers were inspired to write their words. Rather, these laws came straight from the mouth of God. And if you think of God's character, that God is both just, in other words, God has expectations about the way we should live our lives, but that God is also loving. So we have these two things in tension, that God is just and fair, but God is also loving and merciful. And we see these in the 10 Commandments. But we tend to think of the 10 Commandments as God is only just and judgmental and harsh and constraining our freedom. But again, remember, who was he speaking to? The Israelites had been enslaved for 400 years. So they knew nothing of freedom. They didn't know how to make their own choices. They didn't know how to take care of their stuff because they'd never had stuff. They didn't know how to work their way through the day because for 400 years they'd had cruel taskmasters, literally taskmasters who carried a whip and told them exactly what to do, when to be here, when to lay down, when to rise, when to walk, when to sit. So over that 400 years, they completely lost their sense of agency, their volition, their ability to decide for themselves. And as a consequence, they not only didn't know how to be individually in relationship with God, they didn't know how to be in relationship with God as a community. So they were literally wandering in the wilderness, but they were also morally wandering in the wilderness. They didn't know how to behave. They didn't even know how to decide what they were going to wear in the morning because they'd always been told. And as it is with human beings, they began to stray from what God determined as the path of righteousness. And so God said, right, consecrate the people, get them ready. And then God spoke and gave them the 10 Commandments. And these were given not to restrict their freedom, but to guide them, to show them the way, so that they would become a people who were unique in all the world. And this is what God was doing. He was taking a group of people, a particular group, and teaching them how to live in a particular way with each other and with God himself, because this was God's way of revealing himself to the world. This was a unique community like no one else because they had these governing laws. And they were given to not to cramp their style, but rather to teach them how to live God's way, a way that was just and free and flourishing. Now, there's an illustration that was done by a social scientist who were studying the behavior of children, particularly primary school children, on a playground. And they had two groups. One that was a group of, one that has a group of children in a typical school ground with the fences all around them that you are familiar with, and one with a group of children who had no fences. And they wanted to see what would happen if children had the prerogative to do and to go wherever they wanted to. And what they found was that the children who lived within a fence made use of every square foot on the playground. They went all the way to the edge and they played here and there and they had the best time. But the children who were in a playground that had no fences, they stayed close to the school. They were in bunches because no one was sure where to go because they didn't know the bounds of their freedom. So the sociologists decided in the end that the fences were actually enabled freedom rather than restricting it. And this is where we so often go wrong with the 10 Commandments and all of God's laws. We tend to think these are cramping my style, when actually they're enabling us to live a rich and full life, if only we'll remember them. Now, if I told you I'm going to give you a list of guidelines that would enable you to live your best life now, would you write them down? Probably you would. The self-help books in the bookstores sell and sell and sell because people want to know the best way to live. Now, I'm not going to name and shame here, but 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10 for lifelong Christians, ask yourself, why can't you name all 10? It's a good question. Because you're old, is that what somebody said? Okay. Well, we're going to go through some tips that will help us to remember them all. So Joyce, if I can have that first slide. Right. You shall have no other gods before me. Right? Oh, yeah. How many of you got that one? Okay, good. Some of you did not. So number one is, of course, God is number one. God is number one. Okay? Number two, you shall not make for yourself an idol. Now you can see on this screen here there are not one trophy, but two, which is an indication that an idol involves two things, generally you and something else. And when we worship an idol, it is anything that we think about and desire more than God. So think about the things that occupy your minds. We've all got obsessive patterns of thinking. Those are our idols. Those are the things we think would be better than God. So the second one is you shall not make for yourself an idol. Anyone know the third? Yeah, you're a bunch of filthy-mouthed people, I can tell. Third, no, you shall not take the Lord's name in vain. Now, this is what's called a trisequitur. It's an ancient Celtic symbol of the Trinity. So you can imagine Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. The name of God is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, which is how many? 3. So the third commandment is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. God is not a curse. God is not to be talked about casually. The Lord's name is not to be mentioned. The Jews to this day, whenever they see God's name in Scripture, they say Adonai, which means Lord. They refuse to say the Lord's name because of this commandment. So the third one. Fourth one, any guesses? Well, that's important, but no, wrong, sorry. Next one is keep the Sabbath, keep it holy. Now, I've chosen this symbol of a hinge because this is the hinge upon which the whole of the 2 parts of the 10 Commandments, they hinge. Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. This was a distinguishing feature of the community. And this hinge translates the first half of the law is our relationship with God, and then it hinges over to the second half of the law, which is our relationships with other people. So remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. How many of you remember the hateful Sabbath practices of your childhood where you had to sit and be still and do nothing but there was the right intention but the wrong execution, because that practice took away life rather than giving life. So we need to think about ways of honoring God on the Sabbath that give us life rather than crush our spirits. So the next one. You said it a minute ago. Honor your father and mother, right? Number 5. Honor your father and mother. I just put 5 times a day. 5 times daily or more. Now, this commandment is interesting because it's the only commandment that comes with a promise. God says, honor your father and mother in order that it might go well for you in the land that you're about to inherit. In the book of Malachi, when Malachi talks about the coming of the Lord, the first thing he says is that when the Messiah comes, he will turn the hearts of their children to their fathers and mothers, and he'll turn the mothers and fathers to their children. In other words, there'll be a reconnection of family life. Now, when I look out at the world today, I think there's a very key issue going on, and there's separation between children and parents. There is no natural authority structure that's being practiced. Children are given over to screens, and their minds are addled by the time they get to school. Ask any primary school teacher, ask any nursery school teacher, ask any secondary school teacher, and you'll begin to realize this commandment is being neglected. Parents are not turned toward their children, and children are not turned towards their parents. There is a breakdown in society because of a breakdown in the family. Number 6, any guesses? Thou shalt not kill. There it is. Boom. Yeah. Next one. Isn't that clever? If you turn 6 over, it becomes a gun, right? You shall not kill. Now, if you follow the story of the Bible, you'll realize that not long after this was given, the Israelites inherited the land of Israel, and just as they're doing today, they killed and murdered everyone in the land. Now, there is a difference between killing under God's holy orders as an act of war, but this is talking about murder. This is talking about premeditated, I am going to kill that sucker once and for all. And as we learned last week, it's not just killing literally, it's killing in our minds. Because Jesus said, you've heard it said, you shall not murder, but I say to you, if anyone calls your brother a filthy name, or calls him a fool, or says rakah, which means ar, then you're guilty of murder. How much murdering is going on in our society today? How much of it starts right here? Right here. 7. No. Wrong. No. Wrong again. Adultery. Yes. Give the man a cigar. Yeah. Did you all get that one right? The only one you knew. Okay. Wow. That's a pretty sad tale there. 7 is not heaven. When you get caught out in adultery, wow. So I've heard, it's not a nice experience. It is ruinous to human relationships to be unfaithful to your spouse. No need for explanation there except to remind you again of last week's sermon where we talked about anyone, you've heard it said it, you shall not commit adultery, but I say to you, anyone who looks at a woman with lust in his heart has already committed adultery. So it's not just the act of adultery, it's the beginning of adultery, which starts right up here with the things that we think about with our idolatrous obsession with sex. Number 8. Pardon me? Stealing, that's right. You shall not steal. See? The handcuffs? Isn't that clever? I know. I learned this in seminary. 25 years ago, a minister came in and taught us the Ten Commandments. This is the same thing he used for children. These are easily understood. Don't steal. And again, we may not steal with our hands, but we steal with our minds all the time, which is why he gave us the next command. Okay, so we got 2 left. Now, many of you said we got 8 out of 10. Well, here's the last 2. Maybe you didn't get these ones. Number 9. What's that? No, wrong. Yes, you shall not bear false witness. Don't you think that bear looks like the shape of a 9? Not really. I know. But I can tell you, once you get this into your head, you will not forget that number 9 is I shall not bear false witness. Don't tell a lie. And this goes particularly for the judicial system. That you're not to bear false, you're not to lie about someone who's in court. And I can tell you that lying is one of the most corrosive and destructive things that can happen between human beings. Lying is absolutely the most ruinous thing that can get into a human relationship. You shall not bear false witness. Finally, number 10, guesses? Yes, you shall not covet, right? See how that is? Coveting is wanting what someone else has. And it goes back and forth. You shall not envy, you shall not covet your neighbor's house, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, you shall not covet your neighbor's new car, or their bathroom suite, or whatever. We're so guilty of that because we look at other people and we think, oh, I wish I had his talents, or I wish I had her talents, or I wish I had... Wow, nothing does more to give us a feeling of discontent and ingratitude other than coveting. Okay, so we're going to go through these again. So Joyce, you give us the next slide. First commandment, which is, yeah, that's obvious. Guys, number 1, you shall have no other gods before me, because God is number 1. Number 2, you shall not make for yourself an idol to worship or obsess over anything that is other than God. You know, and then another way of putting this, you shall not create for yourself a graven image. So in synagogues around the world, they never had a picture of God, because once you make a picture or a symbol of God, it's automatically going to be less than God, because it's going to be a created thing rather than an uncreated thing, which is God himself. Number 3, don't take the Lord's name in vain, because there's Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. God's name is 3. Number 4, keep the Sabbath. That's right. That's the hinge. That's the most distinguishing feature. It hinges between the first bit which is our relationship with God, and the second which is our relationship with others. There's a hinge there. Number 5. Adultery. You better look again. Honor your father and mother. How many times a day? 5 times a day. Number 6. You shall not kill. Specifically, you shall not murder. None of the premeditated stuff. Number 7. Commit adultery. It seems like heaven at first, but it turns out to be rather hellish when you are caught out. Number 8. You shall not steal. Number 9. Yeah, no lying. You got lion eyes, right? Number 10. You shall not covet, right? So next chart here. See how that breaks down? The first 4 and the second 6, with the hinge on number 4. So number 1 is? That's right. God is number 1. You shall have no other gods before me. Number 2. No idols. Number 3. You shall not use the name. My wife is really knocking it out of the park here. Number 3 is don't take the Lord's name in vain. Number 4 is the hinge between number 4 and number 5. Honor your father and mother how many times a day? 5 times a day. Number 6, you shall not kill. Remember the gun, the 6 is turned over inside. Number 7, this is your chance, John. What was that one you said? You're really good at adultery. Number 7 is you shall not what? Because it's not heaven, it's hell. Number 8, handcuffs. Number 9, and number 10. Okay. So, next slide, that's it. Yeah. What was going on here? Jesus had come into the temple during what season? The Passover. That's right. And just as it was back in the day with the Pharaoh, Passover was a time for the turning of tables, literally and figuratively. So whether Jesus was thinking this was a symbolic act or an act of condemnation or an act of judgment, he literally turned tables during the Passover, which is obviously a foreshadowing of what he was going to do. They had expectations of the Messiah, that he was going to come and clean house and drive the Romans out and establish himself as a new king. But he overturned the tables and changed people's expectations, that he was not that kind of Messiah. And what were the people doing wrong? They were buying and selling. Yeah, they had taken over what's called the Gentiles' court, which is a big open space that was, Gentiles were allowed to get that close to the temple. And there was another section that was even closer to the temple, which was reserved for Jews only. And then there was in the very heart of the temple, the Holy of Holies. And they only entered that once a year on the Day of Atonement. And the priests went in to offer sacrifices on behalf of the people. And what was going on during Passover? Why were they changing money? And why were they selling doves and cattle? Well, to be faithful as a Jew, you had to bring a sacrifice to the temple. And you had to pay for it with local currency, just as we do today. You can't spend euros in Britain and you can't spend pounds in France. So you have to change your money, which, as we all know, is an opportunity for exploitation. It's exploitation. You pay a fee for changing your money. And so you can well imagine that people who've come a long way on pilgrimage are not going to drag a cow all the way there. They're not going to bring a cage with a bird in it. They're going to buy it on the site. So this is what was going on in Jesus's in the temple court. And what did Jesus say? And he says, beat it. You've turned my Father's house into a den of robbers. You've turned my Father's house into a den of robbers. Now, interestingly, in John's Gospel, this event happens at the very beginning of the Gospel, whereas in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, it happens at the end. And it immediately follows on from the triumphal entry, Palm Sunday. So Jesus comes in on a donkey, and then he sees what's going on during the Passover, and he's outraged, a holy, righteous anger, and he goes in and literally cleans house. So which commandments do you think were being broken there that day? Stealing, right? What else? Probably lying. Yep. What else? Pardon me? They were perhaps selling on the Sabbath day. That's a good thought. Yep. What else? Yep, they made an idol of money. How about who was number one on that day? I'm number one. And when all of these other commandments fall away or are compromised in one way or another, it's not very difficult to then disobey the others because you've already fallen out of step with God. It's like a house that you see sometimes we're on a cliffside, and the rain and the wind and the storm. In fact, there's a story about that in the Sermon on the Mount that you can have a look at, that you see these houses and you think, oh my God, that's going to go into the sea, and then all of a sudden the whole thing collapses. And that's what Jesus is talking about with the Ten Commandments. Thank you. That's right. Good. So there was all kinds of things going on, and Jesus was outraged. He said, this is supposed to be a house of prayer, and you've turned it into a den of robbers. So people had the wrong idea about the use of property. They had the wrong idea about the use of property. Instead of being a means of glorifying God, it became the thing that was honored instead of God. It's a very easy step to make, because understanding an invisible and spiritual God is very difficult sometimes. And our minds want to latch onto things. In fact, that's why God has given us the sacraments, communion of bread and wine and baptism with water, because they're things that we understand, these objects. We're all familiar with bread and wine and water. So it's hard to keep in your mind that this is not about property, it is about God. So you and I know this horrendous news that our property is now vulnerable. The fat lady has not sung yet. Final judgment has not made, but it's entirely possible that they're coming for this property to close it down. Now, our session has protested this decision. We have raised a complaint providing what I think are very legitimate rationale for our rejection of this decision, but we haven't heard back yet because we're not the only ones complaining about it. But as we ponder the use of this property, can we be wary of our inclination to bump God out of that number one space and to replace God with an idol of property, and to think hateful thoughts about our neighbors who are making these plans, and to want to steal away and have our own way, to lie. I mean, you see that house that's crumbling into the sea? It starts right here with us and our knowledge, or more likely our lack of knowledge about the Ten Commandments and what they mean. Now, Jesus concluded his little tirade, his speech, by saying what? He's going to tear down the temple and then do what? Rebuild it in 3 days. What was he talking about? His own death and resurrection. He's talking about his own body. He knew that what was upcoming, that in 40 years' time, that temple was going to be reduced to rubble. Jesus was saying, look, you guys have got it so mixed up. You've been worshiping property for so long that God's just going to wipe the whole thing away and start over again by reminding you that the real temple, the real and only important property is the person of Jesus Christ himself. And they can take away this temple. They can come for this property. But what they can't come for is the true temple, which is the body and the person of Jesus Christ, and God's living temple, which is you and me. That we are God's temple. We are God's people in this world, in this time, and this place. So as we go forward in the months that lie ahead, let's keep fighting for our property. And I have much more to say about that, because if we want to go that route, we're going to have to work for it with our money and with our hands. So be wary of that and decide, is it worth all of that? So let's go over the 10 Commandments one more time. Oh, yeah, right. Number 1, you shall have no other gods before me. Number 2, you shall not make for yourself an idol. Number 3, don't take my Lord's name in vain. Number 4, the hinge. Keep the honor of the Sabbath, keep it holy. Number 5, honor your parents. Number 6, murder. Number 7, commit adultery. Number 8, stealing. Number 9, number 10, you shall not covet. Well done. And may God bless you and strengthen you for the obeying of this holy law. Amen.